and she's an exquisite agent of extermination. Helen's story is important and irresistible because it deals with that strange and worrying combination of pleasure and pain, sex and violence, love and hate. But it's also not just a story. Helen and the Trojan War have become epic and iconic, but if you look at them closely, they're very human. The drama starts with a messy love affair and it ends up in a bloody and disastrous conflict. I think that Helen's tale is rooted in Bronze Age reality, and that if you look for her here in the Eastern Mediterranean landscape, you'll find that most of the ancient stories are much closer to history than they are to myth. And it's in that world, in what's now modern Greece and Turkey, that I'm going to look for her, to separate fact from fiction, to find the real, powerful queens who lived here 3,500 years ago. My journey will take me right across the Eastern Mediterranean. To try to find Helen, I'm going to explore the magnificent palaces that controlled this region in the late Bronze Age. I'll discover the mysterious cult centres that placed women at the heart of religious power. I'll follow Helen's journey, looking again at the myths that have helped create her image through the ages, investigating the wars that were fought in her name. I'll be looking for clues in archaeology, manuscripts and art, searching for that hidden Helen, one of the real prehistoric queens who inhabited this rich and savage time. My journey in search of Helen begins at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Most women are written out of history. Helen is written in. She was an inspiration for the earliest masterpieces of European literature, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. These are some of the largest fragments of Homer from antiquity. They're close on 2,000 years old, and they've been beautifully written on papyrus sheets in Greek capitals. Originally, these papyrus sheets would all have been joined together in one long roll, about 30 foot long. It's book 2 of the Iliad. You can still make out the names of some of the great personalities from the epic. Here we have Achilles, the godlike hero. There's Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And here is Hector Priamides, Hector, the firstborn son of Priam. But this little scrap, Nes, is the last syllable of Elenes, the name of Helen. So what we're looking at is the first time that Helen enters the written record.
Sing, goddess of the wrath of Achilles, that fatal wrath which caused the immeasurable anguish of the Achaeans and sent the strong souls of heroes to Hades.
These poems tell how the Trojan and Greek heroes fought a long and bloody battle over Helen, all stirred up by the deities on Mount Olympus. They were written down in about 700 BC, but transmit a much older story based on actual conflicts that took place at least 500 years earlier in what came to be known as the Age of Heroes. Helen's love affair with Paris kick-started the drama of the Iliad and the Odyssey, but Homer's a vital ally, not just as a poet, but as a historical source too. Recent scholarship has shown that a number of his lines do relate directly to Helen's era, the late Bronze Age. And beyond that, Helen is bigger even than Homer. Other great epics were composed with intimate details of her life story, which have been all but lost to time. They only survive now in tiny fragments, works such as the Cypria and the Sack of Troy. So when you're trying to understand Helen's world, you have to look beyond the obvious and pull together all these various strands of evidence. I've been studying Helen for many years, and here in Athens there's plenty of evidence of the myths associated with her. Helen's image has been adorning beautiful objects for centuries. Vases for sale show her in a tug of war between suitors, preening in front of the mirror and seducing Paris. Helen also survives in Greek tragedy, plays still being performed in Athens today. On stage, she's portrayed as either manipulative and destructive, or a mere pawn of the gods, a weapon of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. But you have to go beyond the misleading fantasies to get anywhere near the real Helen, and travel back to the late Bronze Age, when these images of women were painted. As yet, we have no physical proof that a woman called Eleni lived in a glittering Greek palace 3,500 years ago. But what we do have is a trail left by rich and desirable Bronze Age aristocrats who travelled right across the Eastern Mediterranean. And when you follow that trail, you'll find not just heroes, but heroines. These aren't pretty little creatures wafting around in diaphanous robes in front of classically fluted columns. If Helen lived, she lived as a prehistoric princess, right at the heart of a turbulent prehistoric world. Helen's more than a simple object of beauty, so you have to wipe from your mind these pictures of her, all this romantic imagery, which is all, without exception, a fantasy, all made up. What I'm looking for are the real queens who lived in the late Bronze Age, in the 13th century BC, the age which produced these vital clues. I'm leaving the classical imagery of Athens far behind and travelling deep inside the Peloponnese to where Helen's story starts. 3,500 years ago, the Peloponnese was home to the powerful Mycenaean civilization, whose tentacles reached from Crete to Croatia, from the Turkish coast to Sicily. This is an epic setting for Helen's story and for one of the most influential civilizations in the European Bronze Age. And the city that gave its name to the whole civilization is Mycenae. Safe behind their mountain ranges, each Mycenaean kingdom jealously guarded its strategic position, its acquired wealth, and its precious natural resources. What's at a real premium around here is flat, fertile farmland. It's incredibly difficult to squeeze the right amount of food out of the Bronze Age landscape. So you find Mycenaean rulers trying to keep a tab on every fig, every olive, every grain of wheat that's produced. All the agricultural produce will be brought into the citadels and then redistributed back out again. So for the people that lived all around here, they weren't just centres of culture. They controlled whether you lived or died. Across the Greek mainland, Mycenaean centres show striking similarities. Because Mycenae is the best preserved, this is where I should be able to get the clearest picture of the place of women in the Bronze Age. Mycenae was at its peak in 1300 BC. This is the century most likely to have witnessed the Trojan War and therefore the birth of Helen. Mycenae was a major power, enjoying a golden age that was to come to an abrupt end only a century later. Protected all around by mountains and dominating the fertile plain below, Mycenae had all the hallmarks of a fairy tale castle, studded with gold and finery. The immense walls shielded a muscular warrior culture. Head for the top of the citadel and you'll reach the centre of power. These rooms would have been 2 or 3 stories high. They were made of mud, brick and timber, which is why they haven't survived. But it was this place that was the beating heart of the palace, the Megaron, or royal throne room. In the centre there'd have been a ritual fire that would have burnt in the hearth day in, day out, the smoke escaping up through a grand opening in the ceiling. In the late Bronze Age, this would have been fantastically gaudy. There had been coloured blocks of marble on the floor, frescoes all round the rooms, and decorated columns covered in lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Access here was very restricted, open only to the chosen few. So had you made it in here to the Megaron and looked out, you would have known that you were lord of all you surveyed. A high-born woman like Helen would have been part of this Mycenaean elite. One of the aristocrats who enjoyed the riches of the palaces and who lavished wealth on weapons and war gear. This ornate dagger was found in a tomb, as was this warrior vase. No expense was spared in persuading guests and enemies alike of military might and fabulous prosperity. But this is far from the complete picture. It's easy to concentrate on the bullish, macho aspects of the Mycenaean warrior society. But it wasn't all blood and guts. If you look at some of their artifacts, it's clear that they were capable of very subtle feeling. This little trio has been delicately carved out of ivory. It's used as an important research tool to discover exactly what Mycenaean women wore. But when you're close up to it, you can feel that it's resonant with tenderness. The women are draped around each other and one of them's caressing the other's forearm. And that child, it could be a boy or a girl, is leaning heavily on their lap, doing that childlike thing of taking up as much space as is physically possible. It's a touching human image of Mycenaean society, a reminder that these monumental ruins were occupied by heroines as well as heroes. I want to explore this city and unravel the mysteries of the influential and sophisticated women hidden behind its walls. Mycenae has long attracted visitors, keen to see the city Homer describes as rich in gold. The hotels and bars for the tourists in the village of Mykines at the foot of ancient Mycenae are a roll call of classical celebrities. The place I'm staying in is dedicated to antiquity's most notorious daughter, La Belle Hélène, beautiful Helen. But it also commemorates the many famous modern personalities that have come here, including the first archaeologist at the site, the flamboyant Heinrich Schliemann. Enthusiasts have come to Mycenae chasing the heroes that fought in mighty battles and the bejewelled heroines who were their trophies. The Belle Hélène is the oldest guest house in town.
This is Virginia Woolf's company, actually. Like with Leonard Woolf, Marjorie Fry and Roger Fry.
That's the whole Bloomsbury group. We've all come together to London.
In 32, yes, London, yes.
Yeah.
Agatha Christie came many times here, but I have...
And not just writers. A scattering of leaders of the Nazi Party, fascinated by the archaeology of military might.
And the great Nazi here, it's 44 is Hermann Goering, Himmler, 41 with Heinrich, And Dr. Goebbels, Magda Goebbels in 36, as a minister of propaganda.
Goebbels?
Goebbels, yes, that's it.
Helen's the only woman from the Age of Heroes to have endured as a household name. But the danger for all visitors here is that you can easily forget about the real people behind the dramatic archaeology and the later romantic imagery. So when you explore a site like ancient Mycenae, you have to put aside the picture book Helen and focus on the palace's real Bronze Age queens. Helen's face has been imagined by artists for nearly 3 millennia, but none has come anywhere close to the truth. Tantalising discoveries from all across the late Bronze Age world offer up evidence of the striking appearance of a prehistoric princess like Helen. These ancient frescoes depict women in detail, their jewellery, hairstyles and makeup. But the most vivid portrayal of a woman is this one. We don't know exactly who she was, but since she was found in a religious complex, it seems she was both an idol and an ideal. Archaeologist Diana Wardle specialises in Mycenaean dress and personal adornment. She's working with a team to recreate the appearance of a high-status Bronze Age woman. This is the closest that we can get to seeing what a late Bronze Age Helen would have looked like. Now, Sophia's beautifully dark, and the ladies on the walls of the Mycenaean citadels are always dark, but Helen's nearly always described as golden. So what do you think is going on there?
It's a difficult one. Maybe her skin was naturally golden, and if she wasn't dressed up like this all the time, you would describe her as naturally golden. And in Greece, golden or lighter is usually just a very much lighter, dark colour.
It's almost as if she's glittering. I mean, you would kind of covered in the gold jewellery as they were.
She would certainly glitter a lot, yes.
Yeah.
She would glitter a great deal.
She's always described as having white skin, gleaming like milk or like a pearl. But do you think this is what's actually going on, that she's a Mycenaean woman who's having her face painted white?
I think it's very likely that her face is being painted white and that she's going to look unnatural and perhaps even masked.
So what would they have been using in the late Bronze Age to do that?
Oh, white lead, which is a horrible compound to be using.
They can't be putting it on every day because your skin just wouldn't stand it.
Well, you'd die. You could put it on every day, but you would die.
They would have looked extraordinary, the women, once they've got this whole panoply on.
They look grotesque, I think, or even clown-like.
Almost like puppets.
Is that the purpose? Is the purpose to remove the person and produce the mask, so that you've got a persona, not an individual behind the mask? So you're acting as a priest, you're acting as a divinity, perhaps. You're acting a part.
Frescoes show women with different hairstyles. Some of them have shaven heads, but others have twisted and snake-like coils of hair, all of which make a Bronze Age Helen seem even more otherworldly. If Helen looked like anything, this is what she'd have looked like in the palace.
Yes, it's not exactly a face to launch 1,000 ships, is it?
Ah. Well, you never know. For a late Bronze Age Paris, might have been just the thing.
It could be.
She'd have made some impact.
She'd have made a big impact, wouldn't she?
Tomb finds tell us that Helen would have been bedecked with jewellery. Gold from Egypt, hippopotamus ivory from Africa, amber from the Baltic. She would have worn thick woolen robes, rubbed with olive oil to make them shine. Servants would have combed her hair with a bone comb, and they would have made her skin gleam. Frescoes show that on ceremonial occasions, she would have been bare-breasted. She would have blazed a trail through the palace, a glorious creature, inspiring admiration and fear. This is pre-history, where images speak louder than words. So a thing or person of exceptional beauty would have had real worth. As for daily life of highborn men and women of the late Bronze Age, we we know a surprising amount because of basic written records kept by the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans had a script now called Linear B, which they inscribed on wet clay tablets. Only surviving by chance, scorched and preserved by palace fires, these are simple documents, but they give us remarkable insights into life in the citadel. They tell of a rigidly hierarchical society where men took senior political roles. But they also show that mirroring this male society is an equally tightly controlled and influential religious world where women played a central role and controlled the gateway to the gods. The Mycenaeans worshipped some of the Greek gods that we're familiar with, Zeus and Hera and Poseidon, for instance. But there was a whole phalanx of gods and goddesses and demigods and spirits that never made it through to the classical world. Deities like Pipituna and Pereja, the goddess of doves. Some people even suggest there was a female Zeus and a female Poseidon. What there was not was a state-organised pantheon with a male figure at its head. Zeus was not predominant. If anything, it was the female divinities who are due the greatest honours. These are powerful female spirits standing at the heart of Mycenaean culture. A further insight into what actually happened at their ceremonies is found on signet rings, which depict women in control of intriguing religious rites. These golden signet rings were worn by men and women. They were passed down as heirlooms, and we find them left in graves or given as offerings to the gods. It's only an inch or so across, but there's a whole world marked on that surface. What you're looking at is some kind of sacred rite involving just women. There's a sun and a moon up at the top, and a little tiny figure of 8 shield with a mysterious divine presence appearing behind it. I suspect because trees and plants are so prominent that this was a fertility ritual designed to keep agricultural produce coming out of the earth. That seated woman is very important because she's shaking a bunch of poppies. It's one of the clues we have that opium, derived from poppy seed heads, played a central role in religion. These signet rings show a world of abandonment, fueled by narcotics. In a number of Mycenaean sites, the seeds of opium poppies have been found. These rites reveal women who aren't weak or decorative, but powerful and significant. When it came to communicating with the spirit world, women were essential. If you'd come to worship at the temple, then these are the kind of idols that you'd have come across. You can see that the bulk of them are women. They're not cosy creatures at all. I mean, standing here, they appear incredibly grotesque. The little holes that you can see punctured into the terracotta are probably so that people could have hung votive offerings on them. And they've got their arms raised in a gesture that's typical of prayer, so it's possible that these were actually devotees. This lady was found with her head turned facing the wall, suggesting that she had some kind of evil eye that had to be faced away from people as they came into the temple. It's thought that this is probably the representation of a goddess. She's got a chain of beads around her neck and bracelets all around her arms, and she's supporting her breasts in a very typical attribute of a goddess. To find out more about these enigmatic female characters, I'm now heading to the heart of religion in Mycenae, the cult centre, which is still being excavated. This is where those figures were found. It's a kind of holy of holies, a temple right in the middle of a more extensive cult complex. In its heyday, it would have been brightly painted and there'd have been wooden pillars supporting the roof. When archaeologists excavated it, it was as if they'd discovered a moment frozen in time. The figures were stored up here, but on special occasions they'd have been brought and ranged around this hearth. Sometimes they'd be decorated with jewellery, sometimes they'd be given some food or something to drink, and there'd be little sacrificial offerings made to them. And then once the ritual was over, they were taken and put away back here in their resting place. It's that curious paradox of archaeology that sometimes the most metaphysical of activities, like spiritual worship, can leave behind the most concrete remains. All of these female figures point to women holding sway in the citadel. A Bronze Age Helen must have been more than just a pretty face. She would have been feared and honoured in Mycenaean society. Someone who walked hand in hand with spirits, deities, and demons. The best evidence for life in the Greek Bronze Age comes from Mycenae, but in the myths, Helen was said to have been born in Sparta. Although there aren't such impressive remains there, Helen certainly left her mark in Sparta down the ages. Spartans celebrated her, not just focusing on the way she looked, but on what she did, how she affected those around her. We remember her as the fought-over trophy of the Trojan War. But in other tales told by the ancients, her story was already inextricably linked with sex and violence. It was said that her intimate association with brutality went right back to her conception. Zeus, the king of the gods, in the form of a swan, attacked and raped her mortal mother Leda as she washed herself here at the river Eurotas at Sparta. And this was to be the location for another defining moment in the myths associated with Helen. The Greeks told stories of how Helen would come here to the banks of the river Eurotas to dance all night with other young girls. Centuries later, these dances were restaged in some kind of an attempt to capture the spirit of Helen, and we still have fragments of the poetry that the girls sang to each other.
Olympian goddesses, my heart is seized with desire at hearing a new song and the chorus of girls in lovely melody will scatter sweet sleep and lead me to the contest where I'll be tossing my blonde hair. A dance of delicate feet with limb-loosening desire, her glance more melting than sleep or death.
These rites are vital to understanding Helen's appeal. The gift she's giving the young girls isn't beauty, but what the Greeks called charis. Charis is the root of our word charisma, and it can simply mean grace, but it also has an erotic connotation. By invoking the spirit of Helen, the young girls are learning to become charismatic, sexually aware. And certainly these rituals would have been highly charged affairs. They were here alone together all night, there was drinking and torchlight, and they danced naked until dawn. But this commemoration was more than just exuberant dancing. It recalled an horrific and symbolic moment in Helen's life. According to the myths, it was while Helen was dancing on the riverbank that, like her mother, she was attacked and raped. The perpetrator was Theseus, king of Athens. Helen was a girl. He was 70 years old. Theseus was prowling through the reeds when he spotted Helen. Once he'd seen her, he didn't care about the other girls. He only had eyes for the Spartan princess. That's what Helen does to people. She makes them yearn and long for her. One ancient author said that Theseus, amidst all the blessings that he had, thought that life wasn't worth living unless he could enjoy her. a brutal conception, and then attacked on the riverbank, Helen would, from here on in, always be linked with passion and pain. She'd begun her career as an irresistible prize and a creator of conflict. In the real world of the Late Bronze Age, a Spartan princess like Helen was indeed a great catch. Her principal value was as a marriage prospect, with a kingdom to give away. The myths reflect this too, and they describe a great marriage contest held near Sparta in Helen's honour. The most powerful heroes of the day gathered to compete for the hand of the beautiful Spartan princess. In some accounts, Helen's eager suitors gathered here at Amyclae. They had come to challenge each other for Helen's hand. Later authors indulged in poetic descriptions of how the heroes had come here to fight for Helen with her richly tressed hair, her neat ankles and her sparkling eyes. But in the 13th century BC, she'd have been appealing for other reasons too. In the Late Bronze Age, we haven't yet got to a point in history where men have all rights to land. We know from the Lunar B tablets that women could have land holdings too. Onato, they're called. And we also know that they were subjected to religious taxes, which means they must have had disposable wealth. And just look at what you'd have won if you'd come here to fight for Helen. The foothills of Mount Taygetus are teeming with game, and this is some of the most fertile land in the whole of Greece. Marrying for love was a low priority for these suitors. They'd arrived for the chance to improve their lot and to display their physical prowess. You can imagine the hopeful suitors coming here, their blood running high, checking each other out, limbering up, ready for the contest ahead. In classical Greece, these competitions are called agon. It's where we get our word agony from. So you get a sense of just how tough they were. As for the range of sports that would have taken place at a grand event like Helen's marriage contest, there is good evidence from the Bronze Age. A fresco from Thera depicts two young men boxing. I've come to the Pamakon gym to meet Kostas Dervenis, who teaches the sports that would have been practiced in the Late Bronze Age. What's the objective here? What are they trying to do?
The objective is to try to make one or the other subject. You know, it goes on and on. It's like a game of chess, and finally one person will get tired or make a mistake that the other person can't escape from and be forced to tap out. No one really gets hurt. I mean, it's not, the point is not to injure the other party, it's to make him give up.
So what kinds of combat sports do you think you'd have had at a marriage contest like Helen's?
Well, they most certainly did the submission wrestling, because that was the basis of their close quarter combat skills. They might have done some boxing. Well, it was happening all over the Near East and all over the Mediterranean. And for sure, we know that in 2000 BCE, on the tomb paintings of Beni Hassan, we have over 300 depictions of submission wrestling. So I think we can be very sure that it was taking place in the Mycenaean world.
We talk a lot about the age of heroes, but it's a very nebulous
concept.
Why is it a nebulous concept? For me, it's very clear.
Oh, so tell me then, what do you think it is?
Well, the word eros in ancient Greek, which is the same root as the goddess Hera, or the Sanskrit word vira, simply means he who is worthy. Who gets the spoils in this campaign? Well, it's obviously the one who contributes most to acquiring these things. There was very little pretension in their lives. When they traded, they traded. When they got married, they got married. When they fought, they fought. I mean, it was a more vital time.
You've obviously thought a lot about Helen.
Mm-hmm.
What does she mean to you?
Oh, I once spent an entire summer looking for Helen in the areas where she lived in the Peloponnese, in the company of my wife, actually. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think even today, every Greek man is still in love with Helen.
At Helen's marriage games, the heroes wrestled and boxed in vain. In the end, it came down to spending power. Agamemnon, the great king of Mycenae, impressed with the largest amount of treasure, and won Helen for his brother, Menelaus. The poor guy needed Big Brother's wealth to get the girl. So Helen and Menelaus were to be united, bringing together two of the strongest dynasties in the region. In the 3rd century BC, the poet Theocritus describes 12 Spartan girls commemorating Helen's last night of freedom. Under a plane tree near Sparta, 12 virgins recreated the last few hours before Helen married Menelaus. Once again, they were alone together. They danced around the tree, and then tipping up a silver flask, they smothered the bark in olive oil, inscribing a message: "Revere me, I am Helen's tree."
We shall be the first to plat for you a wreath of ground-loving clover to hang on a shady plane tree. And we shall be the first to make an offering of gleaming oil, dripped from our silver flasks, under that plane tree's shade. In its bark we shall cut these words that passers-by may read its message. Respect me, I am Helen's tree.
Helen's beauty is described as being like the dawn, like the return of spring after winter. It's all very idyllic and sensual, but you get the impression that what is being remembered are Helen's happier days before she becomes Menelaus's trophy wife. So, according to the epics, Helen and Menelaus were married and ruled over the rich lands of the Spartan kingdom together. As to where a real Bronze Age queen of Sparta like Helen would have lived, the location of her palace has always been a matter for debate. This is the obvious candidate for Helen's home. It's a series of late Bronze Age remains up above Sparta, and it's on a fortified hill, just as the Mycenaeans liked it. But it's baffled archaeologists for years, because it's just so small. You can hardly describe that as a mansion, let alone a palace. But new research seems to have solved the mystery. These are just basement storage depots. 3,000 years ago, this would have been an entire palatial complex. It's right up on the summit, so it's particularly prone to erosion. And what seems to have happened is that the glittering palace of the King and Queen of Sparta has simply dropped off the edge. Archaeology shows that despite a lack of existing remains, in the Mycenaean period there were 3 impressive buildings constructed on this site.
Hoy de idontis, to Mazdon, Katadorma diotrepeos basileos.
Homer describes the palace of the royal couple as set in many ravined Sparta, and it's certainly a good vantage point for control of the plain below. So here, the archaeology and the Homeric description do back each other up. Life for Menelaus and Helen may be going as planned in their comfortable home in Sparta, but speeding through the white-topped seas of the Aegean is a visitor from a faraway land who will turn both their lives upside down. In the myth, the meeting of Paris and Helen was predestined. Paris, the second son of the king of Troy, had been called on to judge a beauty contest between the three most powerful goddesses on Mount Olympus. The prize was a golden apple engraved with the word Calliste, for the fairest. Each of the goddesses tried to bribe him, but Paris chose Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who had promised him the world's desire. His prize was Helen of Sparta, and in the myth, Paris set sail from Troy to claim Helen for himself. So here he is, Paris, frozen at the moment that he hands Aphrodite the golden apple and chooses her as the fairest of the goddesses. And in return, she promises him Helen. What people often forget about him is that he too was supposed to be perfectly beautiful. Our prince of beauty, says Homer, with his glistening love locks. But in the Iliad, he's a bit of a peacock, too proud of his physique, too keen on the girls. This statue was made in the 4th century BC, and it's very romantic. But I'm afraid to say a Trojan prince of the 13th century BC would have looked nothing like this. He'd have had long hair and earrings in his ears and be draped all round in amulets. A bit more of a medallion man. But he is beautiful, and he knows it. And it's this delectable creature who, according to mythology, arrives in Sparta at the court of Menelaus and Helen. We hear from the epic poem The Kypria that Paris was entertained in Sparta as a xenos, the Greek word meaning stranger or guest. This title guaranteed safety to a foreign envoy, but to secure this status, anyone on foreign business from the late Bronze Age onwards would have had to arrive with gifts of goodwill to present to the court. The rulers of the late Bronze Age world showered each other with gifts. Chestloads, boatloads of treasure exchanged hands. On the face of it, this was simply a way of keeping each other sweet and proving who had the deepest pockets to dig into. But there was also a hidden agenda. This was a world before codified international law, so by orchestrating a complicated etiquette around gift-giving and guest-host relations, the Bronze Age world could come to a common understanding. And if you breached the unwritten rules of that international convention, then you were in big trouble. It seems that Paris barely had time to pay his respects to the king of Sparta when we're told that Menelaus hurriedly and unexpectedly set sail for Crete to attend to a family funeral. His queen was left to offer appropriate entertainment to the foreign visitor. But Paris and Helen had no thought for international etiquette. What follows has been the subject of art and literature for centuries. Helen is shown being abducted in one image, and just as convincingly, happy to acquire another husband and his riches in another. Perhaps Helen intended to play the perfect hostess and show her guests some Spartan hospitality. Maybe they were just left together for a moment too long. So who hovered on whose doorway? Who, in fact, stole whom? It's a key moment in the story, and it's at this point that you make your judgment of Helen. Either she's a victim, or she's a harlot, or she's simply an independent woman. Homer certainly never suggests that she was seized by force. She follows Paris, he says. Sappho's interesting too, because she seems to suggest it was Helen's call. It's worth taking note of Sappho, because she's a rare surviving female voice from the ancient world. Helen, the woman who by far surpassed all others in her beauty, left her husband, the best of men, behind and sailed far away to Troy. She didn't spare a single thought for her child nor for her dear parents, but the goddess of love led her astray to desire. There's no hint of an abduction here. If anything, Sappho's saying that Paris is Helen's plaything, not vice versa. Sappho's scenario gives Helen the upper hand, but it didn't prove to be an enduring take on events. As the story gets retold down the centuries, one version of it becomes increasingly popular: that Helen was forcibly abducted.
But I tell you, when you come here to the Spartan citadel, which would have been incredibly heavily fortified in the Bronze Age, there is no way that an outsider like Paris would have been able to steal away the Spartan queen against her will. If Helen and Paris went to Troy, it would have been with some collusion on Helen's part.
And so the die is cast. Helen and Paris are on the run, heading down towards the little port of Gifeon, where Paris has his ships waiting. And as they do so, they're hurtling their way into history, because from now on, Helen's name is never going to be forgotten. Homer gives her a strangely prophetic line in the Iliad, which starts off, "Poisin episeos theke kakon moron," and us, the gods have sent an evil destiny, that we shall be a singer's theme for generations to come. Once they'd found their ships, Paris and Helen decamped to an island nearby, Cranae. Today a causeway connects it to the mainland. It's a tiny place, populated only by fishermen and occasional day trippers. Cranae means rocky, and this island certainly lives up to its name. The lovers would have known that the retaliations would soon begin, not least because Paris had loaded up his ships with Spartan treasure. Homer tells us that the fugitive lovers allowed themselves just one night on Cranae before they headed out for the open sea. Not surprisingly, it's a moment that's been immortalised by poets for nearly 3,000 years. But I still think that Homer has the best lines. Years later, in Troy, Paris remembered the night when they consummated their dangerous affair. When irresistible longing laid me low, he says, and we locked in love on Rocky Island. Their immediate future was as fugitives on the open sea. Ahead lay Troy. What fate would await them there? The next day, the myths tell us that Paris and Helen boarded Paris's ships and prepared for the journey back to Troy. I'm heading out by sea from Greece to Turkey to retrace Helen and Paris's voyage. We'll be sailing through the islands dotted across the eastern Mediterranean to Troy, which is on the coast of modern-day Turkey. We tend to think of seas and oceans as barriers, but back in antiquity, these were the great highways and byways. Homer even calls them the sea's foaming lanes. So had you been travelling on a stretch of water like this, you've seen little skiffs hugging the coastline, smaller sailing boats with just a few oars, and then the grand galleys owned by the aristocrats of the day. And crisscrossing these waters, there would indeed have been female aristocrats like Helen. Women who, as we've seen, enjoyed influence and standing in their homelands. But now I'm leaving Greek waters, heading for the Turkish coast, to Troy, where Helen's story reaches its dramatic climax. She may have been born Helen of Sparta,
but she would be remembered as Helen of Troy, always associated with the blood to be shed there in her name. I'm retracing Helen's journey, following the route she's said to have taken with her Trojan lover, Paris. Ahead of me, in what is now Turkey, lies the city that has come to dominate Helen's story, Troy. In the stories of the Trojan War, this is where Helen becomes the face that launched 1,000 ships. A huge Greek fleet sails to Troy ready to fight for her return, eventually triumphing by tricking their way into the city, hiding elite troops inside a giant wooden horse. But where do the myths about the most beautiful woman in the world and the war she inspired coincide with reality here over 3,000 years ago? It's only once you get on a boat that you realise that Troy and Sparta are actually relatively close. There's a fragment from one of the lost epics called the Kypria that says it took just 3 days for Paris and Helen to make their journey. That's pretty optimistic for a Bronze Age boat, although they could just about have done it if they'd had perfect sailing conditions. Now we imagine the world divided into East and West, but for prehistoric populations, that concept would have been incomprehensible. There was no invisible line dividing Europe and Asia, over which travellers like Paris and Helen would have crossed. This was simply a fractious theatre of power, with the Aegean Sea at its centre. There was plenty to provoke conflict. As well as wealthy cities like Troy that dotted the coasts, there was control of the rich trade routes that crossed these seas, carrying everything from ostrich eggs from Egypt, ivory from Syria, dyes from Crete, and copper from Cyprus. It isn't a coincidence that Homer associated Helen's story so closely with this particular region, where trade and aggression ran hand in hand. The Trojan War has become a morality tale, warning men away from headstrong and seductive women. But there's a deeper truth here, based on the reality of the rich pickings at stake. You can get a good idea of what a valuable prize Troy was here at Çanakkale, the nearest modern Turkish harbour, just 12 miles from the archaeological site of Troy. Over 3,000 years after the time of the Trojan War, these waters, the Dardanelles, are still one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Anything passing from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea has to travel through these narrow straits. Control them, and you control a fortune. Nearby Troy was perfectly placed to exploit the potential value of this setting. It had its own beach harbour at Beshik Bay, so it's little surprise that the ambitious Mycenaean Greeks should have travelled overseas to make their presence felt here. Back in the 13th century BC, this is where any ship coming to Troy would have beached. The bay would have curved much further inland back then, and that headland afforded real protection against the tricky winds and currents that you start to get once you move from the Aegean up to the Dardanelles. Because it was such a perfect spot to stop, this was a favoured port of call for vessels from all over the eastern Mediterranean. So had Helen stepped down a gangplank onto these sands 3,000 years ago, she'd have come to a place full of the sounds and smells of exotic lands. Just 5 miles inland stood the magnificent city of Troy. The citadel crowned a small hill, commanding the fertile plain and seaways from behind its massive walls. The story of the rediscovery of Troy took its most dramatic turn over 130 years ago, The German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann spent a fortune excavating this unpromising hill, driven on by his quest to find the real locations of Homer's Iliad and the treasures owned by its key characters. It seems that Helen was most important to Schliemann as a kind of fantasy woman. In his personal life, he'd already acquired a beautiful young Greek wife who could recite Homer perfectly, and then he found a crown for his fairy tale princess. Excavating 30 feet or so underneath that little fig tree over there, he came across an extraordinary treasure hoard. Golden necklaces, finger rings and diadems, which he immediately dubbed the jewels of Helen, and draped around his mail-order bride. Schliemann got his young wife to pose in the ancient jewels, but he was hardly recreating Helen. Poor Sophie's allure fell well short of history's greatest beauty. And, to add further insult, it was later realised that this was all a nonsense. These jewels would have been worn by a woman living 1,200 years earlier than any real Helen. But in truth, Schliemann was underwhelmed by what he found. The site just seemed too small to be King Priam's city. When I first came here 20 years ago, it was actually pretty disappointing. Very hard to imagine that this could ever have been Priam's glorious citadel. But archaeologists have been excavating here every summer since then, and they now realise that the site is a full 15 times larger than they previously thought. This was a jewel in the region. Before Helen's age, this mud brick palace had already been standing for 1,000 years. A newly arrived visitor from Greece over 3,000 years ago couldn't help but be impressed by Troy's wealth and sophistication. Where these stones now stand, there were walls 10 metres tall, guarding a settlement of up to 10,000 people. Archaeologists have found evidence for visitors and produce coming here from all over the eastern Mediterranean. These striped pots unearthed in Troy showed direct contact with the Mycenaeans. There's even evidence for settlers from Greece. A whole Mycenaean graveyard has been found near the coast. So a woman arriving here from Sparta in the late Bronze Age would certainly not have been the first Greek to come to Troy. Whether she came as Paris's bride or as his whore, Helen now belonged to Troy. Had you been walking down here back in the 13th century BC, you'd have been joined by a whole stream of women making their way to the citadel. Contemporary evidence tells us that these courts had giant harems with a very strict hierarchy. There was the first wife, secondary wives, freeborn concubines called heir-surtout, and then below that, a whole rank of women who were captives, basically little more than sex slaves. So women, often themselves the spoils of war, formed part of the lucrative trade coming and going through these gates. Even a high-status woman like Helen was a commodity with diplomatic value. Because Troy has been levelled and then reoccupied so many times down the centuries, as you walk through the ruins, it's hard to get a sense of the remarkable dynamism of the late Bronze Age city. But travel beyond the Dardanelles, and you'll find its 21st century equivalent. Istanbul. Like ancient Troy, Istanbul is a crossroads, a cosmopolitan trading post, standing at the gateway from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. When you come here, it's about as close as you get to the atmosphere of Bronze Age Troy. We know that there they spoke at least 8 different languages, and I've already heard 4 around me. Hello. There are people here from both sides of the Bosphorus, from east and west, and their one reason for being here is to buy and sell. The city is full of produce from all over the world, from local specialities to some luxuries that would have been for sale in the markets of the late Bronze Age. with me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, welcome.
Do you have any rose petals?
Yes, I have.
Yeah? Oh, lovely. Yeah,
natural.
yeah. Can I smell them?
Please.
Oh, it's lovely. We know from Linear B tablets and fresco evidence that the Mycenaeans traded in coriander and cumin and rose petals and saffron. It's lovely stuff that was worth its weight in gold. Only women were allowed to pick this. But what's really surprising is the quantities that they're trading in. It's almost as if the Mycenaean aristocrats wanted to scent mark their territories. They were proving in some way that they had the time and money to make themselves smell sweet. So when Homer talks about Helen dressed in fragrant robes and lying asleep in scented rooms, it probably wasn't just poetic imagination. As a rich trading centre, the Trojans were hardly without friends, or at least commanding neighbours who wanted a piece of the economic and political action. Lying to the east was the enormous Hittite Empire that dominated much of the area right down to the frontier with Egyptian territories. On the edge of all of this was Troy, known in the Late Bronze Age as Wilusa, sandwiched between the worlds of the Hittites and to the west, the Mycenaeans. No written records have survived in Troy, but their neighbours, the Hittites, were great bureaucrats. And as a superpower, the Hittites were intimately involved in the life of the wealthy maritime city of Troy. Their records allow us a glimpse of Trojan life and politics. This is a lovely little piece of evidence that shows how strong the ties were between the Hittites and the Trojans. It's a personal treaty between the king of Troy, Alexander, and the king of the Hittites, Muwatalli II. Basically, it's a pact of non-aggression, but it also sets down the dynamic of the relationship between the two. The king of the Hittites, Muwatalli, thunders, "If I write to you, Alexander, take charge of infantry and chariots. Send them to my aid immediately." It's very clear who has the upper hand here. Muwatalli carries on, "If you, Alexander, transgress the words that stand on this tablet, then the 1,000 gods of the Hittites shall eradicate you, your wife, your sons, your lands, your cities, your threshing floor, your fields, your cattle, your sheep. But if you observe these words, you shall thrive in the hand of my majesty." It's only a little thing, but it shouts loud and clear. The Hittites of muscle. You have to keep on the right side of them. Study the Hittites, and the men and women who inhabited this part of the world in the Bronze Age start to come into focus. I'm heading to the Hittite capital, Hattusha. It lies over 500 miles to the east, in the high heartlands of Anatolia. Even today, it takes a good 12 hours to drive to the Hittite capital from western Turkey. Like Troy, Hattusha was an eastern city famed for its great wealth. The classical Greeks made a lot of the fact that Helen wasn't just lured away by Paris, but by the wealth of the East. There's a great line in one of Euripides' plays where Hecuba, who's Paris' mother, spits out at Helen, "Once you'd left the Spartan city, you looked forward to a deluxe of extravagance in Troy with its rivers of gold. Menelaus' halls weren't large enough for your luxury to wanton in." The classical writers weren't exaggerating. The trail I'm following brings me this far east because here it's uniquely possible to glimpse the material wealth and far-reaching influence that some women enjoyed at the time of Helen. Exploring Hattusha, you're again reminded why the aristocrats of the Late Bronze Age became legendary. Their achievements over 3,000 years ago were extraordinary. particular rampart is over 30 metres tall and 250 metres across. It's a magnificent display of royal authority both to inhabitants and visitors alike. Like everything here, entry was carefully controlled.
This corridor is called Yakapi, which means the gateway into the earth, and it actually tunnels right up through the rampart. It runs well over 60 metres. Had you come here 3,000 years ago, it would have been a lot brighter because the floor would have been painted white, and I suspect there'd have been little lamps in all these niches. But it does make a very theatrical, impressive entrance to the city. It's almost as if you're moving from one world into another. And once you finally emerged from the tunnel, you'd have been in no doubt that you'd been embraced by a superpower. Hattusha is a massive complex. Those square footprints that you can see would all have been temples. And beyond that, there's a royal citadel. And then as far as the eye can see, the land is controlled by the Hittites. Not only that, but Hittite power can be felt as far south as Syria, to the east in the Euphrates, and way, way out west in Troy.
And that power was wielded by both men and women.
It's a real treat to be holding this, considering it was last used over 3,000 years ago. This is an imprint of a seal of King Hattusili III and Queen Pudahepa. You can see her names written down here phonetically, Pudahepa. It was actually quite common for kings and queens to share seals, and for aristocratic women to have a degree of independence from their consorts. But Pudahepa pushes things that bit further. She has her own seal, and through sheer force of character becomes one of the movers and shakers of the late Bronze Age.
Some of the Hittite queen's correspondence, with her personal seal attached, still survives. It shows that she could face down the mightiest rulers of the region. Pudahepa kept up a correspondence with all the great leaders of the day, and she had a particularly feisty exchange with the Pharaoh of Egypt, Ramesses II. He was complaining that she hadn't sent her daughter to be married off to one of the Egyptians in the court, and she replies, "I cannot give my daughter to you right now because, as you well know, the treasure house of Hatti has been burnt out," i.e. she can't send her daughter because she hasn't got a dowry to go with her. But then Pudahepa can't resist adding in a little jibe. "Does my brother possess nothing at all? Only if the son of the sun god, the son of the storm god, and the sea have nothing, do you have nothing? Yet, my brother, you seek to enrich yourself at my expense? That is worthy of neither your reputation nor your status." She's clearly a woman who knows how to stick up for herself. It's further evidence that the late Bronze Age, the time of Helen, was an era when forceful women could make their mark. The Hittite treaties are made in the names of individual rulers, not states. They bear this out as a period when individual leaders could control the fate of vast populations. So this was an age of heroes and of heroines. Here in Hattusha, over 3,000 years ago, extraordinary documents were written that give a voice to the age of Helen. They don't only tell us about the powerful personalities of their leaders, but also how relations between men and women were defined.
If a man sins with his mother, it is an abomination. If a man sins with his daughter, it is also an abomination. If a man has a wife and the man dies, his brother shall take his wife, then his father shall take her. There shall be no punishment.
Hittite laws frequently cover the breakdown of family relations and questions of sexual consent. just the sort of issues at the heart of the story of Helen and Paris.
It might seem rather convenient that the Helen and Paris story has all the ingredients of a potboiler. But back in the late Bronze Age, just like today, rape and abduction and adultery were live issues. Quite a number of the tablets found here at Hattusha laid down the law about who was to blame and what kind of punishments they should have. For instance, one reads, "If a man seizes a woman in the mountains, it is the man's offence, and he shall die. But if he seizes her in the house, it's the woman's offence, and the woman shall die." In other words, if a woman's raped at home, then in Hittite eyes, she was asking for it. "If the husband finds them and then slays them, there shall be no punishment for him." So if he catches them in the act, then he can kill them with impunity. Mind you, things were never quite the same again, because if you were a cuckold, it seems that you dropped an entire social rank. And when adultery reached the ranks of aristocracy, the crisis could escalate. In one particular case, the Hittites had to be brought in to cool down two states who were at the brink of war because of the behaviour of a princess. A royal bride had been sent to the young king of Ugarit. Things didn't quite go to plan. It seems that she had a love affair when she got to the court and she was sent back home in disgrace. But then her husband demanded her return, presumably to execute her. The two states didn't actually end up fighting, but clearly this kind of a problem could have international significance.
And so the behaviour of a woman like Helen in the late Bronze Age could spark serious diplomatic incidents. The Hittite records even give us clues about strife over Troy.
In one of the letters from Hattusha to a king of the Mycenaean Greeks, we have direct evidence that there were hostilities over Troy itself. It's only a passing reference, a little more than a line, but it speaks volumes. "In that matter of Wilusa, Troy, over which we were at enmity, the king of the Hittites has changed his mind, and we are now friends. A war is wrong for us." There is no question that in the late Bronze Age, there was some kind of a conflict over Troy.
As more Hittite texts are translated, it's becoming increasingly clear that parts of Homer ring true, that his stories are rooted firmly in the late Bronze Age. I think Homer's recalling a series of conflicts over Troy, as evidenced by the Hittite tablets, and he's spun them into one story centred around Helen. In this world, the dubious behaviour of a high-born woman would have been a valid excuse to start a war, especially when the prize was a city as valuable as Troy. It's therefore appropriate that Homer remembers Helen as an active protagonist in the conflict.
When Helen's at Troy, we hear that she spent a great deal of her time weaving a giant tapestry, such a rich dark purple, it was the colour of congealed blood. Onto it, she was immortalising the deeds of the heroes, the endless bloody struggles of stallion-breaking Trojans and Greeks armed in bronze, Homer says. Bronze Age women did weave, but I think Homer's telling us something different here. This is Helen's story. She's in charge. It's Helen who's pulling together the threads of all these men's lives.
Homer composed the epic of Helen and the Trojan War 400 years after the event. But he was drawing on a bardic tradition of storytelling that had been repeating the epic stories down through the centuries. So some of Homer's lines do correspond directly with late Bronze Age archaeological evidence, such as the description of armoury that had disappeared by Homer's era. Odysseus, for instance, is described as wearing a helmet like this, thickly covered in boar's tusks, typical of those actually excavated from Mycenaean sites. So you sometimes have accurate military detail, heightened by dramatic poetry.
Autorepei cosmeten hab hegemonesinificastoi, Troes men klanget en opet isan,
The Trojan squadrons advanced with a clamour of weapons and shouting voices. Wave upon wave, like birds rising before the face of heaven, promising evil strife to their foe.
Ai, darisan sige, many up ne on Tesakai.
But the Greeks came on in silence, breathing fury, resolved to stand shoulder to shoulder.
But Homer didn't simply concentrate on the macho posturings of the heroes. Like other Greeks, he saw an intimate connection between war and lust. We think of sex and violence as distinct entities, but for the Greeks, they were two sides to the same coin, two primordial urges that brought a great deal of trouble to mankind. It's easier to understand the relationship between the two when you remember how the Greeks regarded Eros. For them, Eros was not yet Cupid, a sweet little thing fluttering across Valentine cards, but a rangy, malevolent boy who invaded body and soul, grinding down your resolve to a powder. Like Cupid, Eros did have arrows, but his arrows were tipped with a burning poison, and you were just as likely to find him on the battlefield as you were in bed. Before they went to war, Spartan soldiers would sacrifice to Eros, and Homer uses the word megnumi to describe engagement both in the act of sex and the act of war. For the Greeks, there was no dividing line between the lust for love and the lust for blood. In Homer's version of the Trojan War, written centuries after the actual fighting, some of the lines clearly refer to his own era, the Iron Age. For instance, he describes all the fighting as taking place on foot, whereas in the late Bronze Age, the real time of the Trojan War, one weapon in particular was supreme on the battlefield, the chariot. The time of Helen abounds with images of chariots at war. This was the high-status weapon. These carvings show the Hittites taking on the Egyptians at the Battle of Kadesh, contemporary with the era of the Trojan War. To investigate whether this really was fighting fit for the Mycenaean and Trojan heroes, an Ajax or a Hector, we brought accurate replica late Bronze Age chariots back to the plains of Troy. Mike Loads, an expert in ancient weapons, has trained horses he's hired from local gypsies to pull them. Usually these animals pull farm carts, but today they're war horses. They've got a lot to live up to. The Hittites wrote extensively about how to get a horse into peak condition. I'm very glad for your grooming, because the Hittites are very keen on their horse care, weren't they?
Well, I mean, Kukuli.
Yeah.
Kukuli of the Mitanni wrote this wonderful text, which really, I mean, it pays a lot of attention to grooming techniques and really calculated feeding regimes to get them to peak fitness.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how fit these are. You know, one day they would go so many miles and then they would rest, and then the next day they would have certain things to eat, and then they would do so many miles trotting, so many miles galloping, and so building up, just like an athlete, building up peak fitness, and these would have been superb equine athletes.
Done this in the late Bronze Age, because it's usually men and women separately.
But we're not in the late Bronze Age.
Indeed.
So
we can
welcome
break
aboard.
a few rules.
Keep your legs flexed so you just take the shock of the bounce.
Yeah.
And hang on. But we've got very sedately to start with.
Fantastic. Does it always
Get on.
creak like this?
Get on. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a wonderful soundtrack of the Bronze Age, isn't it? there's the leather and the wood, and it creaks and the harness jingles, and that's what it sounds like being on a chariot.
Yeah. I love the bells. I'd never imagined they'd have bells on them.
Yeah, well, the bells are great because the horses have the bells on all their life, even when they're out grazing. So they're used to that constant ringing. And the function of that is that becomes the dominant sound in their ear. Get up, you lazy man. And so all the cacophony of battle, they're going to hear that in the background. It's not going to spook them
Yeah, sure.
and frighten them.
They've always got their familiar noise with them. Well, Homer talks a lot about that, about the screams and cries of anguish on the battlefield, so I guess if they've got that as a familiar, then, as you say, it's not going to spook them.
Get on! They can really get on. Ha! Get on!
Ha! They really can! Whoa! Wow, she corners like she's on rails!
Composing in the Iron Age, Homer describes chariots as little more than battle taxis, dropping off his heroes to do the real fighting on foot. But the carvings show that in the late Bronze Age, chariots were also used in the heat of the action, sometimes pitched directly against each other. Our large Hittite-style chariot is going to do battle with this lighter Mycenaean vehicle.
So this is the Greek chariot, is it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the traditional view is that the Mycenaeans wouldn't have used them for warfare, that they'd have just used them for taxis.
At this period, everybody is fighting in chariots. And if the Mycenaeans have come over here to fight on this chariot country, I mean, this is chariot country.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't
So
have
if
had
they're
a
going
chance.
to take them on, and we know they had chariots.
They're going to use them.
To understand how chariots would have fought each other in practice, Mike's turned once again to the ancient carvings. They show chariots as fast-moving firing platforms.
The great thing about the chariot as a mobile missile platform is it can take the archer where he needs to be, and then he can start picking off the enemy. You can get really quite good accuracy, even over this terrain. And of course I could have been shooting at the horses.
In the late Bronze Age, the bow was the weapon of kings and pharaohs. Not the case 400 years later in Homer's time. For him, bows weren't purely heroic. Instead, they were often the weapon of the coward, killing at long range. For example, he puts a bow into the hands of Paris to kill unbeatable Achilles. And in the Iron Age, this grand chariot warfare was nearly all gone as well. But the larger-than-life Bronze Age characters skilled in its practice outlived their time, surviving in popular imagination and in Homer's poetry.
Homer would have loved all of this. So if you read the Iliad, it is almost cover-to-cover gore. And he was bothered by the inconsistencies and messiness of war, but he certainly didn't mince his words when it came to describing the various gruesome ways that men could die. This is a passage from Book 16, and if you're squeamish, you should cover your ears. Idomeneus de erimonata, catastoma vele calco. Idomeneus skewered Eurymus straight through the mouth, the merciless brazen spear point raking through, up under the brain to split his glistening skull. Teeth shattered out, both eyes brimmed to the lids with a gush of blood and both nostrils spurting. Mouth gaping, blowing convulsive sprays of blood, and death's dark cloud closed down around his corpse. And of course, all this was laid at Helen's door. It was just that one moment of eta, is the Greek word, abandonment, that caused the deaths of thousands and thousands and thousands of men. Once again, it's eros and eris, love and strife, sex and violence, walking together hand in hand.
Homer has latched on to an oral tradition where heroes fought, where people made their name. Chariot warfare is spectacular. It is show-offy. It is glamorous. So it is the sort of thing they would do here on this theatre.
Yeah.
If you're fighting warfare like this, people are going to make their names that will last forever.
Many of the most dramatic scenes in Homer involve heroic single combat. In one of the most famous episodes in the Iliad, Homer tells how Paris agrees to take on Helen's aggrieved husband Menelaus in full view of the city. Helen's sitting in her rooms, but Iris, the messenger of the gods, calls her out. "You can't miss this," she says. "Your two husbands are fighting to the death over you." And as she walks onto the walls, King Priam asks her to pick out the Greek heroes. "There's wily Odysseus," she says. "There's Ajax, he's a giant of a man. There's red-haired Menelaus." And as she stands up here in full view of everyone, she's a prize for Greeks and Trojans alike. The old men of Troy start to gossip, whispering in their dry voices like cicadas. "Ah, there she goes," they say. "Now I understand why we're suffering such agony. What beauty, terrible beauty." We've only got Homer's word for all of that, but if you come to Troy, the archaeology fits. I'm standing on the ramparts of the royal citadel. Just below me there, that pile of stones is a late Bronze Age gate which has been blocked in at some point. Behind that, there's the edges of the town, and then just beyond, a broad, flat plain. Travel west and you hit Beshik Bay, where Greek ships beached. Everything points to this being the perfect vantage point. From here, Helen could have watched her two husbands fighting to the death. Homer recounts it as classic heroic single combat, heavy with ritual. First of all, the battleground is marked out. The two fighters draw lots, and Paris hurls the first spear. It pierces Menelaus' shield, but doesn't wound him. He then throws, but now Paris' shield holds firm. Then the fighting becomes less ordered, less honourable. Helen's first husband grabs Paris by the helmet and drags him back to his comrades. The Greeks are going to hack Paris to death. Yet once again, where there's violence, sex is never far away. Homer brings the goddess of love, Aphrodite, back into the story. She covers the battlefield in mist, releases the forlorn Paris, and spirits him back to safety in Troy. But Aphrodite hasn't finished yet. She leaves Paris stretched out languidly on his bed and goes to fetch Helen, forcing her to pay homage with aphrodisia, the things of sex. But Helen doesn't want to sleep with Paris. She's embarrassed by him. He's dishonoured her. She tries to resist him. She tries to fight Aphrodite. But you can't take on the goddess of love and win. The more Helen pours scorn on Paris, the more she provokes him, the more lustful he becomes. It's one of the most erotic moments in the Iliad. "But come," Paris says, "never as longing for you overwhelmed me so." He led the way to the bed. His wife went with him. And now, while the two made love in the large carved bed, Menelaus stalked like a wild beast up and down the lines. Where could he catch a glimpse of magnificent Paris? The fighting rages on, and one by one the heroes fall. Paris himself is eventually killed, ironically with a poisoned arrow. Desperate to win the day, the Greeks come up with an extraordinary plan. If there really was a Trojan horse, it certainly didn't look like this one at Troy today. It's hard to imagine anyone hiding troops in here. The Trojan horse has become an icon of the war and of the superiority of Greek brain over Trojan brawn.
And it's helped to cement Helen's reputation as dangerous and untrustworthy. As she endeavours to betray her Greek kinsman inside the horse, she's once again the archetypal fickle woman. She walks around the horse 3 times, stroking its flank. As she goes, she imitates the voices of the women that the soldiers have left behind them in Greece, murmuring sweet nothings, calling out the names of the heroes. It must have been torture for them. They'd been on campaign for 10 long years. But for once, Helen's charms weren't quite powerful enough, and Troy's fate was sealed. As the city slept, the Greek heroes crept out and threw open the gates. The women of Troy were taken as slaves, the men slaughtered. And what of Helen? Was she cowering in the corner of a city somewhere, or waiting, praying, desperate for Menelaus to come and rescue her? Well, the Greeks keep their options open, and they told both sides of the story. On vase paintings that portray the episode, Helen's often plucking at her veil, and it's very difficult to tell whether she's covering herself up in fear or loosening her clothes to welcome Menelaus back. But whatever Helen felt, Menelaus just wanted to kill her. He tears through the city, hunting her down, his sword held high. And then when he sees her again, all he wants is to have her back. The Greek playwrights made a great deal of this, saying it wasn't Helen's beautiful face, but her beautiful breasts that turned his hate to lust. Once again, Helen is an irresistible force of nature. The Spartan queen was returning home. The ancients tell us that beacons were lit on summits across the eastern Mediterranean, exactly the way in the late Bronze Age that the news of the fall of Troy could have been carried all the way back to Mycenae and Sparta. Meanwhile, Helen and Menelaus were taking a slower route home by sea. When they travel back to Sparta, they take with them many glittering treasures to decorate their palace. And one of the gifts that Helen is given is a golden spindle. A golden spindle has been found in a Bronze Age grave. So once again, Homer isn't just concocting a fairy tale, he's itemising specific details from the distant past. Helen and Menelaus eventually return to their palace, high above the Spartan plain. This is one of the most surprising points in Homer's story, because there are hardly any recriminations. Helen's a home wrecker. She's destroyed men's lives, and yet she seems to be getting off scot-free. Once she's back in Sparta, she's in charge of the palace once more. She welcomes Trojan War veterans to her halls, mixing up a magical brew. Into the potion, she slips drugs that will make them forget everything, soothing away the pain of the psychological and physical wounds that she has caused. She might be playing the good wife, but she's still a sorceress. So even in her later years, Helen still crackles with danger. She still controls things, undimmed by her disgrace. But like a flame that burns brightest before it gutters, Helen and her golden age of heroes were about to be extinguished. Archaeologists have discovered that shortly after the period of the Trojan War, around about 1200 BC, the civilizations of the eastern Mediterranean all suffered major catastrophes. The Hittite Empire collapsed. At Troy, there's evidence of destruction by earthquake and fire. And in Mycenae, the figures in the cult centre were stowed away, and the palace appears to have gone up in flames. The Dark Ages had come to Greece.
There were great fires here in the Spartan citadel too. The only clue we have to the human tragedy are 3 skeletons. One of a woman about 30 years old who'd been trussed up and then hurriedly buried in a shallow grave, and 2 small children. From now on, this palace would be abandoned. But Helen refuses to go away. If there's one thing I've learnt about her, it's that she's a survivor. Civilizations might come and go, but no one forgets her name.
And although down the centuries the beautiful Helen came to be vilified, here at Sparta she lived on, a vital life force, worshipped as a godlike creature. And on this hill, right next to the Spartan palace, her likely Bronze Age home, this shrine was raised to Menelaus and his wandering wife, a place known for centuries simply as Helen's Temple. Helen had moved from real woman to sublime beauty.
There'd have been a small wooden idol of Helen up here, and men and women would have come to pay their devotions to their dynamic heroine. They left her gifts and made sacrifices in her name. Archaeologists have found a little perfume jar inscribed to her and a flesh hook used for hanging sacrificial meat. It's Helen who's given the honour of what has to be one of the most spectacular locations in the whole of Greece.
I'm convinced that Helen, the gorgeous spirit worshipped here, and the fatal beauty at the heart of Homer's epic, derived from a woman of real flesh and blood.
The earliest written sources for Helen describe a brilliant and brutal queen, and that is an accurate picture of the late Bronze Age world. There's no doubt that here at Sparta there lived a dazzling aristocratic woman who had a special relationship with her gods and who controlled the lives of the men around her.
A figure of such power and allure couldn't be allowed to fade from history. She'd inspired desires, fantasies, and fears for millennia. Throughout my journey, I've seen that Helen, as one of the most famous women of all time, has been perpetually hijacked for the purposes of both men and women. Homer made her the excuse for war, her abduction justifying the death of thousands, a dangerous ally of the gods. In Greek plays, she's an effortless manipulator, the cause of hatred between East and West. Right through history, she's been an object lesson in women as victims, sometimes passively, sometimes as rape fantasy. At other times, she's the skilled seductress, the powerful woman able to control men to suit her will. But women revered her for her potency and beauty. Spartan girls rode chariots in her honour and danced by the river to recall her coming of age and marriage, hoping to catch some of her charisma and sexual power. From Greece to Hollywood, Helen the myth endures. But what of the Bronze Age Helen, the Spartan queen who lived in the Peloponnese over 3,000 years ago? With her palace obliterated, no evidence has ever been found for a tomb of Helen. But we do know how a Mycenaean aristocrat of Helen's status would have been buried. Magnificent tombs of the late Bronze Age have been excavated across the Peloponnese. A Spartan queen would probably have been buried in one of these vast man-made caverns. It's still easy to imagine that echoing cacophony as official mourners extolled the dead. We can piece together the ceremony from archaeological discoveries in tombs.
The corpse would be laid down on the ground or on a bench and surrounded with rich goods. In one grave, a woman's been buried with a bronze mirror pressed right up close against her face.
Religious figurines were placed around the body. Daggers have been found in women's graves, along with the tools used in life to enhance their beauty.
The corpse was finally covered in a shroud, decorated with gold. There'd be little incense burners here and oil lamps too. A final toast would be made, a final libation poured, and then the tomb would be closed and the woman would be left alone in the dark. Because the late Bronze Age tombs of the King and Queen of Sparta have disappeared, we will never find Helen's body. And so it seems her prophecy from the Iliad, that she has an evil destiny to be a singer's theme for generations to come, will always be fulfilled. Until we've seen Helen as a dry, dusty corpse, a sad, flawed mortal, we will never stop fantasizing about her, never stop blaming her for being the most beautiful woman in the world.
Tomorrow night at 8, high-flying, lush film drama, Live by the Sword, Die by the Sword in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Coming up next tonight, trying out brand new tracks from his new Intensive Care album and performing some of the old classics too. Robbie Williams is live in Berlin.